Hey there friends, Andrea Walford here from Make Beautiful Cards. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to create these two fall-themed cards using Stampin' Up's Beautiful Autumn stamp set. Now I'm going to start by giving you an overview of the supplies that we're going to be using, and then from there we're going to move into creating the card. Now when we actually create the card, I'm going to be speeding up the video because of course we're creating two cards in this video and it does take a significant amount of time. So I'm going to speed it up and just walk you through what I'm doing each step of the way. So let's take a quick look at the main supplies that we're going to be using in order to create these cards. Now the stamp set that I'm using is Stampin' Up's Beautiful Autumn stamp set, and I'm going to be using the coordinating punches, and these are the Autumn Punch Pack. Now you can buy these together with the stamp set. It's called the Beautiful Autumn Bundle. In addition to that, I'm going to be using a single circular die from the Stitch Shapes dies. This is the second from the largest of the circles. Now to stamp my images, I'm going to be using Early Espresso Classic ink and Mint Macaron Classic ink. And then I'll be coloring in the images using the Early Espresso Stampin' Write marker. I will be using light and dark Cinnamon Cider Stampin' Blends. So the Stampin' Write marker is same ink as in the ink padded dye-based ink. The Stampin' Blends are an alcohol marker. I'm also using light and dark Cajun Craze and light and dark Mint Macaron. Now in terms of the paper and cardstock that I'm going to be using, I'm going to be using Very Vanilla for the note cards, along with, and it's the thick Very Vanilla cardstock, and then I'm going to use the regular Very Vanilla cardstock for creating my stamped and punched images and my greetings as well. The other cardstock that I'll be using for accents is the Cajun Craze cardstock. And the pattern paper that you see here comes from the Gilded Autumn Specialty Designer Series paper. And there's two patterns I'm using. This one that is the Mint Macaron color with these gold foil lines. So this is what the other side of that looks like. And then the second pattern is a crumb cake pattern with these brown kind of speckles on it. That's what the other side looks like. So we'll be using only those two patterns of paper. In terms of embellishments, I have my gold hoop embellishments, and these are circular flat gold hoops. I will be using some gold metallic pearls. These come in a 2-pack with gold and silver, but we're only using the gold. And then finally, I have this ribbon here. This is a Mint Macaron 1/2-inch basket weave ribbon, and this is sold as part of a combo pack called the Basket Weave and Metallic Ribbon Combo Pack. Then of course you're going to need a variety of adhesives. I always work with a tape runner. If you like, you can also use a liquid glue like the Tombow Mono liquid glue. You're going to need some mini glue dots, some Stampin' Dimensionals, and that's probably good for adhesives. And then of course, you know, your regular paper cutter, bone folder, all of that kind of stuff. So now that we've talked about what supplies we're using, let's dive in and start working on our cards. So I'm going to start by stamping all the elements that I'm going to be using on my cards. The first 3 elements I'm stamping are ones that I'm going to be punching, and I'm stamping 2 of the acorns and 3 of the oak leaves in Early Espresso Classic ink, and then I'm going to be stamping 5 of the maple leaves in Mint Macaron Classic ink. As you can see, I'm aligning the bottom of the stamp so that it's pointed towards the edge of the cardstock piece, and that simply makes it easier to punch out later. Now the remaining 2 images we're going to be fussy cutting. One of them is the wheat stalk, and I need 3 of these images stamped. And then the other image I'm using is the leaf stem, the one that has 3 leaves, and I want 3 of these images. And for both of these images, I'm also using the Early Espresso Classic ink. Next, I'm going to color the wheat stalk image using my Early Espresso Stampin' Write marker. I'm going to use the bullet tip, and I'm just going to add color to each individual segment. So I colored 2 of the images with the Early Espresso, and then for the third one, I colored it with the light Cinnamon Cider Stampin' Blend. Next, I'm going to color the leaves with my light and dark Cajun Craze markers. So using the bullet tip, I'm going to add a layer of the light Cajun Craze on each of the leaves, and then I'm going to take the dark Cajun Craze and add a little bit at the very bottom and along the right edge of each of the leaves. Finally, I'm going to blend out the edges of the dark Cajun Craze with the brush tip of the light Cajun Craze, and I'm simply going over the very edge of the dark Cajun Craze. So from there, we're now going to move on to our maple leaves, and I'm going to be using my light mint macaron marker, once again working with the bullet tip so that it's easy to get into those small, fine little areas, and I'm going to cover the entire leaf with a layer of the light mint macaron. I'm then going to take the brush tip of the dark mint macaron and just add some over the veins. For the oak leaf, I'm going to add a layer of the light Cajun Craze marker, once again using the bullet tip. And then I'm going to come back with the brush tip of my dark Cajun Craze marker and just add a little bit at the very bottom of the leaf and going up the center. For my acorn, the bottom portion of the acorn, I'm going to color in with a single layer of my light Cajun Craze using the bullet tip, and then using the brush tip of my dark Cajun Craze, I'm going to add a little bit along the outer edges, blending it out with my light Cajun Craze, and then coming in with a slight small second layer of the dark Cajun Craze to add extra shadow. For the top, I have a single layer of light cinnamon cider, and then I have the edges and bottom with the dark cinnamon cider, blending out the edges with my light cinnamon cider, and then going in with a little bit more of the dark just to deepen the shadows. Now from there, I finished coloring in the rest of the images in the same way that I demonstrated. Now once all the images were colored, the next step was to punch them out with the coordinating punches from the Autumn Punch Pack. As you can see, I used the punches for the acorn, for the oak leaf, and then I also had a punch for the maple leaf. Now, as I mentioned earlier, for the two remaining images, which is that wheat stalk and then the leaf stem, because I don't have any kind of a punch or a die for them, I need to fussy cut them out. So I'm simply using a fine tip pair of scissors and cutting around each image with about a 1/16 of an inch border. Now I do have a video you can refer to for tips on fussy cutting, and it's called How to Fussy Cut Like a Pro, and you'll find that on my YouTube channel. So I just went ahead and I fussy cut all three of the leaves and all three of the wheat stalks. With all my elements punched and fussy cut out, it's now time to create our sentiments. So my first sentiment is the hey there, and I have that mounted onto the door of my Stamparatus. And in order to stamp it, to make it easy to trim into a little greeting strip, I'm using a large piece of very vanilla cardstock. The lines on my mat there help me to align it so that the greeting is in the bottom right corner of this piece. To hold my cardstock in place, I have my magnets and then a little piece of low-tack Scotch tape. Now I'm stamping my greeting in my Early Espresso Classic ink. Now once the greeting is stamped, the next step is to trim it into its little sentiment strip. So for that, I'm going to be using a portable guillotine trimmer. And as you can see, the big piece of cardstock makes this easy to handle, easy to align, and easy to trim. So once I trim the height, the next step is to trim the length of it. For my second sentiment, I'm also stamping it in Early Espresso cardstock, and I'm going to stamp it towards the bottom of this very vanilla cardstock piece, and then I'm going to use my paper snips to fussy cut it out. So wherever there's a straight line of text, I'm trying to cut as straight as I can, and then where you see the script font, I'm basically curving around it using my paper snips. So we're going to start by creating our Life is Better with You card. So I'm starting with the two die cut circles. They're about 2 3/8 of an inch in diameter, and they were die cut with the second from the largest die from the stitched circle dies. I'm layering the patterned paper circle on top of the Cajun Craze cardstock circle, leaving about 1/8 of an inch width at the widest part. Now I have here a 3/4 by 4 1/4 inch piece of Cajun Craze cardstock and a 2 inch by 5 1/2 inch piece of patterned paper. I'm going to stick the cardstock to the left-hand edge of the patterned paper piece, making sure that it's centered. And then I'm going to take those two pieces and stick it onto the front of my very vanilla thick note card so that the left edge of that Cajun Craze cardstock strip is about 1/4 inch from the left edge of my very vanilla card. And I'm just sticking it down using my double-sided tape runner. Now I'm going to stick my circles onto my card front, and I want to stick it so that the top edge of the circle is about 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch down from the top edge of my card, and the left edge of my circle is about 1/2 inch in from the left edge of my card. Now I have here my mint macaron basket weave ribbon, and I'm cutting a 3.5-inch piece, and I want to stick it across the center of the circle. And to do that, I'm just going to use some of my double-sided adhesive. Now if there's overhanging edges or threads, you can just trim them with your scissors, and you want to align the left edge of the ribbon with the left edge of your card. Now the elements I'm going to be using for this card include 2 of the leaves, a early espresso and cinnamon cider wheat stalk. I have 3 of the mint macaron maple leaves, 2 of the oak leaves, and 1 of the acorn. Now, as you saw, I did trim the ends of the leaves and the wheat stalks because I didn't want them to extend or for you to be able to see them beyond that cluster of elements that I'm going to be creating. Now, in order to help me determine the placement of all of these elements, I decided to start with my greeting, which is "The life is better with you." So I placed 2 large Stampin' Dimensionals along one side, and then underneath the life, I just have a mini Stampin' Dimensional. And I didn't remove the backing from the mini Stampin' Dimensional because I'm going to stick it down later. So I want to be able to tuck some of the elements underneath that. Now to stick my elements down, I'm using a combination of liquid glue and mini glue dots. It just makes it easier. The liquid glue, because it takes a little bit of time to dry, it can be a little bit challenging when you're layering multiple pieces because then they tend to move before the liquid sets. Now, as you can see, I've grabbed my paper piercing tool, and that's simply to make it easier for me to pick up some mini glue dots if necessary. So I've stuck down the first set of leaves and then the first of the wheat stalks, the cinnamon cider one, and then using a little bit of glue, I positioned the second, the early espresso wheat stalk. Now for the second set of leaves, I added a little bit of glue, and you can see that I have stuck it down onto the circle. From there, I moved on to my maple leaves, and those ones were just a lot easier to stick down using mini glue dots. Now, after placing the mini glue dot on the back of the leaf and sticking it down, I don't press down all the way, just in case I need to reposition any of these elements. Now, with all my elements placed, you can see I have all the centers of each of the elements facing inwards, and that's because I want them to be covered by the acorn. So the acorn I mounted with a Stampin' Dimensional, and then once I had positioned my acorn, then I went back to that last little mini dimensional and removed the backing so I could stick it down. My last step with this card was simply to embellish with a few of my gold metallic pearls, and as you can see, I placed 3 at the bottom, and then I placed 2 of them towards the top. So that's our first card. So now let's move on to our second card. So I have a patterned paper piece, same pattern paper as the first card, and it's 2.5 inches by 4 inches. I have 2 strips of Cajun Craze cardstock that are 3/4 of an inch by 3 3/4 of an inch, and then I have that crumb cake pattern paper piece that's 2 inches by 4 1/4 inches. So I'm going to stick one of the Cajun Craze cardstock pieces along one edge of my crumb cake pattern paper piece, making sure it's centered. And then I'm going to take the second strip of Cajun Craze cardstock and stick it along one edge of the mint macaron pattern paper piece, again making sure that it's centered. Then that mint macaron pattern paper piece I want to stick down onto my card so that the Cajun Craze piece is facing upwards. And as you can see, I'm leaving an even border on the left and right sides. From there, I'm grabbing my crumb cake pattern paper piece and I'm centering it on the mint macaron piece, or kind of centering it. I want to make sure there's an even amount of the mint macaron above and below, and that the Cajun Craze strip is pointed towards the bottom. Now I'm cutting a piece of ribbon that is about 3 1/4 inches wide. It's again that mint macaron basket weave ribbon. And I'm going to stick it to my card using my double-sided adhesive so that the left edge is about 1/8 of an inch in from the left side of the card, and it's about 1/8 of an inch up from the bottom edge of that crumb cake cardstock piece. Then I'm going to take that gold hoop embellishment that you see and stick it down to my card using my mini glue dots. Now I'm sandwiching it in between 2 mini glue dots, and I'm placing the glue dots where I know it's going to be hidden by the sentiment and by any of the additional elements. Now as you can see, I'm placing one Stampin' Dimensional to the right of the hoop, and then the other one I'm placing on my actual sentiment strip. And it just makes it easier to know where to place it. Now there, I'm just sandwiching the other side of my gold hoop, also using those mini glue dots. So my first step is going to be to stick down my sentiment strip, and I'm not pressing firmly because I might need to shift it a little bit, but I'm basically using it to help me determine where I'm going to place my elements. Now, for the most part, I used mini glue dots to stick these elements down rather than liquid glue, just simply because it was faster and easier. Now notice for the leaf, I didn't end up trimming it. I left the stem intact. And for the wheat stem, I also left the stem intact. Now the two maple leaves, you can see that I'm sticking them on with mini glue dots with the bottom of the leaves, again, pointing inwards because I want to make sure they're covered by that acorn. Same with that oak leaf, I have the bottom pointing towards where I know it's going to get covered by my acorn. So for my acorn, I'm going to stick it down using a Stampin' Dimensional, and I just rearrange some of my elements to make sure that they're all covered. The ends are all covered by the acorn and they look like they're clustered around the acorn. And as you can see, I have the acorn positioned so that it's slightly overlapping the greeting strip. So the only other thing I did with that final card was to add some of my gold metallic pearls to embellish it. So there you have it, friends. I hope that you enjoyed this video tutorial, and I look forward to creating with you again soon. See ya!